In the top stories, Federation records one more COVID-related death. Cuba marks 60 years under world's longest economic embargo, and a state of emergency declared in Ottawa, Canada. Hello and welcome to the ZIZ Midday Newscast. Today is Monday, the 7th of February 2022. I'm Jason Davis. Nationally, the Federation has recorded one more COVID-19 related death, bringing the national total to 38. The Ministry of Health made the announcement in the COVID-19 situation report for Sunday, February 6. According to the report, one more confirmed positive case was recorded in the preceding 24 hours. That brings the total number of cases, active cases, to 191. There have been 5,476 positive cases recorded so far, with 5,247 recoveries. The following is a press release from Government House. His Excellency the Governor-General, Sir S.W. Tapley Seaton, GCMG, CVO, QCJP, LLD, has transmitted a message of congratulations to Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II on the occasion of her 70th anniversary of her accession. It reads as follows. I would be grateful if you would convey to Her Majesty the Queen the congratulations of the people and government of St. Christopher and Nevis, and on my own behalf of the 70th anniversary of her accession in 1952. We would be grateful if you would assure the Queen of our continued prayerful support for her continued well-being, and that we record our thanks for her service and continued service as Queen. The Office of the Governor-General also received a message from Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II on the occasion of the 70th anniversary of her accession. In other news, the fourth wave of COVID-19 infections across the Federation has begun to subside, and during the most recent NEOC press briefing, Chief Medical Officer Dr. Hazel Laws stated that long COVID-19 may still be affecting some persons.
There are some persons who have had that call, gotten that call. They go on to describe symptoms, long-standing symptoms, or what we deem long COVID. Some of these symptoms include malaise, fatigue, brain fog, just to name a few. Now, long COVID has been a challenge, as health entities and countries have different practices and requirements for making the diagnosis. So in the United Kingdom, for example, you have to be experiencing or complaining of some of these symptoms for as long as 3 months before you are diagnosed with long COVID, whereas in the United States of America, in about 4 weeks. If these symptoms persist for a month, the diagnosis may be made.
The Ministry of Health has embarked on a mass vaccination campaign in order to provide protection to citizens and residents of St. Kitts and Nevis from the deadly COVID-19 virus. According to Dr. Laws, the complexity of the COVID-19 virus calls for robust action to help curb the spread.
Now, long COVID can happen no matter what virus variant occurs, and there's no evidence that there's any difference between Delta, Beta, or even now Omicron. Omicron came to the fore in November of last year, so not enough time has elapsed for the scientists to say emphatically, you know, what are the signs and symptoms of long COVID secondary to Omicron. Now, although getting vaccinated significantly lowers the risk of developing long COVID, reinfection may cause a flare-up in symptoms. So it's important to note that. It is too soon to know, scientists say, but mild initial illness may not signal reduced risk.
Medical officials have said preventing exposure to COVID-19 coupled with double-dose vaccination against COVID-19 remains the most effective way in combating the deadly virus. Older adults who are unvaccinated and those with underlying chronic conditions, which include diabetes and hypertension, are most at risk. We now move to news on the regional scene. Cuba is marking 60 years since the United States imposed sanctions on the communist government. The world's longest-running economic embargo has mostly affected common citizens. The United Nations estimates the blockade has cost the island more than $130 billion. Al Jazeera's Lucia Newman reports.
The disintegrating buildings of Cuba's once magnificent capital, a reflection of a crumbling economy in what was once regarded as the jewel of the Caribbean. It's as though the country had been frozen in time, back to 1962, to when the United States declared an economic, financial, and diplomatic embargo against its tiny communist neighbor. It was at the height of the Cold War. 75-year-old Rolando Ignacio Ruiz was 15 then, just 3 years after the triumph of the Cuban Revolution. 60 years later, he laments that the embargo is still in place.
They should have removed it long time ago. If after all this time the United States hasn't achieved anything, it certainly won't now. It only hurts our people, but the government remains in place.
He's not wrong. The world's longest economic embargo has certainly hurt ordinary Cubans, limiting access to medicine, cheap U.S. imports, technology, and credit through a U.S. dollar-dominated financial system. Washington's purpose has always been to modify or force out Cuba's one-party communist system, but clearly it's failed miserably.
On the contrary, in Cuba's case, the embargo has become a fundamental component for the survival of the Cuban state and its current government. The tougher the sanctions, the easier it is to accuse the United States of violating sovereignty, destabilizing the country, and organizing rebellion.
That is exactly what happened when economic hardships and restrictions on freedom of expression exploded into unprecedented mass demonstrations last year. Referring to 60 years of economic embargo, President Miguel Díaz-Canel alluded to sanctions against Cuba's allies, Venezuela and Nicaragua.
This criminal and immoral policy imposed systematically against us is a massive violation of the human rights of the Cuban people, and is the same one that is now threatening and attacking other nations of our region with unilateral coercive measures.
Harsh sanctions against Venezuela and milder ones against Nicaragua's Daniel Ortega have in fact encouraged alliances with China, Russia and Iran, making them less dependent on the U.S.
I don't know of any case in Latin America where sanctions have produced the desired results, even partially.
The same might be said for unilateral sanctions in other parts of the world. But while they may not be effective, they remain Washington's preferred means of persuasion. Lucia Newman, Al Jazeera.
Bahamian authorities have reportedly seized 2 cruise ships belonging to Genting Hong Kong's Crystal Cruises in relation to a lawsuit over $4.6 million in unpaid fuel bills. According to Cruise Law News, crew members confirmed that the ships Crystal Symphony and Crystal Serenity were seized in the Bahamas after diverting from their original destinations in order to avoid arrest. Inside Asian Gaming reported that Crystal Symphony diverted from Miami to the Bahamas on the 24th of January to avoid seizure by U.S. Marshals before being joined by Crystal Serenity in Bimini last week. Crystal Serenity had been refused permission to dock in Aruba. Both ships were commandeered in waters near Freeport on Friday, crew members said, although it remains unclear how they were seized as the Bahamas is outside of the jurisdiction of the U.S. The dramatic events follow an order from a U.S. judge that the ships be seized as part of a lawsuit launched by Peninsula Petroleum Far East against both Crystal Cruises and Star Cruises for alleged failure to pay $4.6 million in fuel bills. Crystal Cruises announced in January that it was suspending operations until at least the 29th of April after its parent company, Genting Hong Kong, filed for liquidation amid debts totaling almost $2.8 billion. Moving now to news on the international scene. Ottawa's mayor has declared a state of emergency in the face of ongoing protests, clogging streets and causing chaos in the core of Canada's capital. Karen Seelan reports for City News on the growing frustration over the local response.
This is a nationwide insurrection.
At a meeting of Ottawa's Police Services Board this weekend, the chief said his force is starting to buckle under the strain of what critics have called a lawless occupation.
A police service under the Police Service Act was never created. The legislation supporting the Police Service Act was never contemplated. The oath of office that I and my officers swore were never intended to deal with a city under siege.
Of course, we want police to reflect on the constitutional implications of intervening, but I think what we're talking about here has far exceeded, what's reasonable as far as a constitutionally protected assembly or right of expression.
Emily Tammin is one of the lawyers arguing a class action lawsuit on behalf of downtown residents seeking massive damages and an injunction to stop this. Incessant horn honking.
We expect to be able to show that this is actually an organized tactic to disrupt daily life for people in Ottawa as a means to exerting pressure on the government.
While convoy organizers called for a short period of quiet on Sunday, some honking could still be heard. As of Sunday morning, there were 500 vehicles parked around the hill. Police are now warning anyone attempting to bring gas and other supplies to the demonstrators could be subject to arrest. But many are wondering why the city is not going to court for its own injunction to empower local authorities to get protesters off the streets.
We're sort of struggling to understand why that hasn't happened before now. I think a lot of residents are feeling very abandoned.
Several local councillors are calling on the federal government to take control, with a motion expected to be introduced at Monday's council meeting. Political strategist Zane Velci believes more assertion from the feds is necessary.
I know they could be criticized for political pressure. I think that's a risk they need to start taking as it relates to putting pressure on the City of Ottawa or providing other resources to get this done.
For its part, the province of Ontario is dismissing concerns from Ottawa Police with the clear message from the Solicitor General and Premier Doug Ford being police have been given everything they've asked for and they have the authority to act to deal with the situation themselves. Karen Seolin, City News.
Still on the international scene, Amazon forest blazes have sparked an air pollution crisis in Colombia. Drought, heat, and arson attacks by armed groups are thought to be behind the blazes. Now the capital has been put on air pollution alert. Al Jazeera's Priyanka Gupta reports.
Toxic air is choking Colombia's capital, Bogota. A thick cloud of smoke looms over its 8 million people, carried by dry winds hundreds of kilometers away from fires burning in the Amazon.
We have decided together with our Secretary of Health to decree a yellow alert for the prevention and care of severe respiratory disease in Bogota throughout the public and private hospital system.
The air quality is so bad, the government says it's best to stay mostly indoors. But for those who can't, it's come at a cost.
The yellow alert for pollution harms me because I work on the street every day and it's harming my lungs more than it should because it has increased more.
In Colombia's Amazon, record temperatures and deforestation blamed on former FARC rebels are creating a combustive mix. Here, the defense minister gets a first-hand look at the nation's largest national park, a UNESCO World Heritage Site under threat.
The Chiribiquete National Park was burnt by criminal hands that seek through this practice to deforest, to appropriate the land, and the responsibility for this abhorrent practice lies with the FARC dissidents.
Since the FARC rebels disarmed and gave up control of the territories they once held, destruction of the Amazon has been on the rise. Groups of rebels who rejected the 2016 peace deal with the government are accused of starting fires to graze cattle or grow coca to make cocaine. Its effects are now being felt in cities across Colombia. Priyanka Gupta, Al Jazeera.
And now for the weather. Current conditions are cloudy skies with showers in the vicinity. The temperature for today is 26 degrees Celsius or 79 degrees Fahrenheit. Winds are a moderate breeze of 18 miles per hour from the east-northeast. Seas are moderate with waves of 5 to 7 feet with northeasterly swells reaching 5 feet. A high surf advisory remains in effect. The weather forecast for St. Kitts and Nevis today will be partly sunny in general with only a 20% or slight chance of a brief passing shower. Tonight will be fair and partly cloudy and cool conditions with a 40% or moderate chance of brief passing showers. Sunset today will be at 6:09 p.m., sunrise tomorrow at 6:40 a.m. And that brings us to the end of the ZIZ Midday Newscast. Join us this evening for these stories and more in detail. Thank you for tuning in. I'm Jason Davis.